Torrin Ridge wasn't on any tourist map, but for aviation students across the state, it was sacred ground. A knife-edge cliff slicing into the sky where winds didn't just blow, they hunted. Today, the ridge buzzed with drones, cameras, and students in bright vests. This wasn't just a glider showcase, it was the final round of the National Autonomous Flight Championship. The sky shimmered like a forge. 3 top-tier students prepared to launch, each with a custom-built glider controlled by state-of-the-art AI. Their names trended on tech forums. The crowd of classmates, engineers, and livestream followers gathered like a festival. Comments poured into the feed. Sky Queen 99's gonna break the altitude record today. Bet you $50 Red Falcon overcompensates again. Why's Gandalf on the hill? That last comment referred to him. The old man. Standing silent in a brown canvas coat, leaning on a wooden cane, his beard silver gray like the low clouds rolling in. No badge, no lanyard, no tech gear. He looked like someone's forgotten grandfather wandered into the future. Liana Cruz, top pilot and technical lead of the event, was tightening her harness when she noticed him. "You lost, sir," she asked with polite confusion. He didn't answer, just tilted his head slightly into the wind, eyes half closed. Then came his voice, rough like rock slide. Winds shifting, from the east, sheer drop coming. Liana blinked. "We've run a full LiDAR sweep. No anomalies." He nodded once. Machines feel the wind behind them, but it's the front that kills. The second student, Tyson Red Falcon Lins, snorted behind his reflective visor. "What is that mountain poetry?" People chuckled. The chat blew up. "Bro thinks he's Avatar Aang." "Let him cook. Tell him it's 2025, we got satellites now." But the old man didn't move, didn't argue. Just stared at the trees on the lower ridge where leaves had begun twitching against the direction of the prevailing flow. Tyson launched. The glider caught the updraft and soared sleek, perfect. Gasps of admiration rose from the audience. "AI handling optimal," one of the judges noted. Flawless pitch. 15 seconds later, it happened. The wind cracked. Not blue cracked like a whip tearing the air sideways. Tyson's glider jolted, spun once, then began to corkscrew uncontrollably. The crowd screamed. "He's dropping, shut down AI switch to manual override." But the system didn't respond. On the ground, his father collapsed into a crouch, eyes frozen. The live stream flickered, then cut to static, silence. In that silence, one figure moved. The old man had already started walking toward the launch controls. Not running, just walking like he'd seen this before. Like he knew the end of the story and chose to meet it head-on. The camera from drone number 4 snapped back online, just in time to catch the glider skimming treetops, then jerking violently upward at the last second. A parachute had deployed. Tyson was alive. People screamed in relief, half sobbing. Liana dropped her clipboard. One of the judges put a hand over his chest. And the old man, he simply turned around, looked once more at the clouds, shifting like restless wolves, and whispered to no one in particular, "It's starting again." His name was Elias Drexler, though no one at Torrin Ridge that day knew it. They just called him the old man or that mountain weirdo. No one had spoken his name in aviation circles for nearly 4 decades. Elias had once been a name whispered with awe. In 1978, he was the youngest test pilot recruited by the Department of Defense's high-altitude glider initiative, Whisperhawk. The project aimed to develop human-guided flight systems that could read air currents the way dolphins navigate sonar intuitively biologically. Elias had no formal degree, but he could read the wind like it spoke a language only he understood. They tested him in places where wind wasn't just movement, it was madness. The Carpathian Vortex, the Himalayan Voids, and most famously, the Kashmir Deadslide, a glacial trench where no radar had ever mapped a stable updraft. Elias landed without assistance, surviving a downdraft that had snapped 3 military-grade wings before him. The secret: he didn't fly through the wind. He flew with it. He claimed he could feel the shape of pressure before it arrived, like a blind man sensing a wall by the way sound bends. They called him the Wind Whisperer. But men like Elias don't last long in systems built on machines and metrics. In 1983, a mission over the Sierra Nevada ended in disaster. A second pilot followed Elias's recommendation against AI calibration and crashed fatally in a wind shear. Elias was blamed. Unverifiable instinct, they wrote in the black box report. He was discharged, quietly labeled a risk to predictive technologies. His name was scrubbed from records. The legend faded and he vanished. Only the mountain remembered. Torren Ridge became his refuge, a place so wild, not even the best AI systems could map it cleanly. Locals whispered about a hermit who marked trees with strange lines, who whittled wooden feathers and muttered to the rocks. Some hikers saw him standing barefoot in the wind at dawn. They thought he was mad, but Elias wasn't broken, he was buried. He spent years building what he called the Wind Book, a hand-drawn log of air behaviors, annotated not with data points, but with metaphors. This current bends like a hesitant dancer or sharp shift by 3:17 p.m. like a door slammed from the east. He didn't try to be seen, but every so often, he'd catch a glimpse of the future he was denied. Drones cutting across his sky, students calling each other pilot while staring at screens. They flew by numbers, not by breath, so he stood by the edge during each competition, silent, watching, waiting. He wasn't there to teach. He wasn't looking for redemption. He just didn't want someone to die the way that boy nearly had. Back in the village at the foot of the ridge, the cafe owner sometimes left an extra cup of coffee on the windowsill when the wind turned. No one saw him take it, but the cup was always empty by noon. Once during a harsh winter, a teenager trying to impress a girl attempted to paraglide from the western crag. The wind snapped the chute mid-air. They never found the body. The day after, a carved wooden feather appeared on the girl's doorstep. No one ever asked where it came from. Over time, the younger generation replaced memory with memes. Elias became a myth in Facebook groups, the glider ghost. Someone even made a TikTok filter of his silhouette turning to wind. But Elias didn't care. He had learned that silence was the only place where truth wasn't drowned. Then came Liana Cruz. Young, brilliant, arrogant. She had soared into competitions with software so advanced it could predict microcurrents in real time. The same software that had failed Tyson that day. She didn't come to thank him after the crash. Not right away. But something inside her had cracked. She came back a week later. No cameras, no teammates. Just her and a question. How did you know? Elias looked at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. You can't fly a glider with fear, he said. But you can't survive it with pride either. Then he turned back toward the sky. And she, who had always led with machines, stood beside him. And waited. And listened. That was the moment everything began to shift again. They met every morning at the break of light, when the ridge was still veiled in mist, and the wind had not yet chosen its direction. Elias never said to meet Liana, just showed up. The first morning she stood 3 steps behind him, hands shoved into her jacket pockets, watching him breathe like he was tuning into something only he could hear. She broke the silence after 10 minutes. So, what am I listening for? Elias didn't turn. He just lifted one arm and pointed toward a narrow channel between 2 jagged cliffs. The place looked meaningless, just stone and shadow. But when Liana stepped between those cliffs, something shifted. The sound of wind didn't just rush, it coiled like a whisper curling around her ears. She gasped. Elias said nothing. You feel that too? He finally looked at her. His eyes were pale, almost clouded, but they pierced through her defenses like a scalpel through silk. I feel what the wind touches before it touches me. That didn't make sense, but it made something happen. Liana came back the next day, and the next. By the 5th day, she stopped wearing her smartwatch. By the 10th, she stopped bringing her laptop. He taught her to listen with her skin, not her ears. To track the movement of birds, the sudden shift of leaves 5 trees away. The wind doesn't move first, he said it announces. She laughed once, telling him he sounded like a shaman. He didn't laugh back. There was no mysticism in his method. It was awareness sharpened by time and necessity, the kind of sensitivity that modern systems dismissed because it couldn't be measured in decimals. In the world of aerodynamics, Liana had always been top tier. Her project WISP Wind Integrated Software for Paragliders was hailed as a breakthrough. Her team had won awards. Her code had been published. But now with Elias, she began to understand something she never wrote into the algorithm. Intuition doesn't need evidence to be real. Away from the spotlight, Liana's body began to change. Her steps slowed, her shoulders softened, her eyes stayed open longer. She started mimicking Elias's rhythm walk. Pause, listen. She noted cloud density not by satellite, but by how much her breath fogged in her throat. Meanwhile, the campus chatter noticed her absence. Did Sky Queen 99 burn out? I heard she's off-grid. Maybe training for that Himalayan expedition. Maybe she's just scared. Red Falcon's crash shook her. No one knew what she was doing. She didn't live stream. She didn't post. Her name slowly fell off the leaderboard, but Elias saw the spark growing. One morning, after a particularly brutal wind shift nearly knocked her off balance, she didn't flinch. She planted her feet, turned her ear to the gust, and grinned. That one felt like a warning. Elias nodded faint approval in his quiet hum. She was learning, not just technique, but humility. She began to understand why Elias never went back to the world that betrayed him. They didn't just silence his instinct, they laughed at it. And in their laughter, they gave up something precious, the ability to feel. One afternoon, Elias handed her a tiny strip of ribbon. Tie this to the top of your glider, not to measure wind, just to watch it dance. It was red, unmarked, meaningless to data. But to Liana, it felt like a baptism. Weeks passed, and then one morning she asked, "What would happen if I flew without WISP?" Elias didn't answer right away. He walked to the edge, wind howling around his boots, coat flapping like torn wings. "Flying blind isn't brave," he finally said. "But flying aware, that's freedom." And with that, she knew. She wouldn't compete with software. She would fly alone, with the wind, the way Elias once had. Not for glory, but to prove that something buried still breathed. The announcement landed like a punch in a lecture hall. "I'm flying solo." Liana said, her voice flat but unwavering. "Manual glider. No AI. No assistive software." Silence. Then the room erupted. "You what?" her former teammate shouted, half rising from his seat. "You're giving up everything we built our code, Liana." Even Professor Hallberg, the stoic head of advanced aerial systems, raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me you'll compete in the autonomous flight finals without an autonomous system?" Liana nodded. On social media, the response was harsher. "Sky Queen 99's fried. Is this performance art? She's going to kill herself on live stream." They laughed in the comments like they had laughed at Elias. Only now it was a girl giving up her throne for a ghost. In private, her advisor called her in, sat her down, tried to reason. "You don't have to make this a statement. Just fly the demo. Use a hybrid system." Liana stared at her hands. They were still strong, no tremble. "Do you know what it's like to follow instructions from a thing that doesn't feel what's coming?" she asked. "To have a hunch in your bones, but the readout says ignore it." Her advisor exhaled. "You're quoting Elias Drexler now." Liana looked up. "No, I'm listening to him." Back on the ridge, the training got harder. Elias pushed her now. Less silence, more consequence. Too slow on that turn, he barked once. If the wind pulls that sharp on a narrow spine, you'll flip. Liana growled in frustration, sweat streaking her forehead. I felt it, just not fast enough. Then feel faster, he said, eyes like flint. She didn't cry, not in front of him. But that night alone at the foot of the ridge, she opened the live stream chat she'd abandoned for weeks. Over 10,000 followers still subscribed. She typed nothing, just watched their casual cruelty. She used to be brilliant. Guess flying with an old man beats therapy. Let her crash. It'll be poetic. The comments blurred, but she didn't look away, because if she wanted to step into the light, she had to know what it felt like to be scorched. At the next dawn, she told Elias, "They want me to fail." He didn't look surprised. "They need you too," he said. "Because if you don't, they have to listen." 1 week before the final, Liana submitted her entry form. Handwritten. Manual class. Non-autonomous entry. The committee hesitated, then allowed it. She wasn't just a novelty. She was now a threat to the system. Words spread like windstorm through the forums. Manual class is back. Why let her compete with the autos? She's exploiting nostalgia. Watch her crash and cry. But Elias didn't flinch, and neither did she. The day before the competition, he handed her a page from the Wind Book. A simple sketch of the ridge with a single note. At 6:23 p.m., the east side breathes. No further explanation, just that. And she memorized it, because soon the world would stop watching numbers and start watching her. They called it the Sky Summit, final round of the National Autonomous Flight Championship. The event was held at Torren Ridge as always, but this year it was transformed into a spectacle. Temporary towers framed the launch pad. Drones hovered in formation, cameras blinking red and blue. On the far side, a LED scoreboard live-streamed telemetry from each glider. Hashtags trended worldwide. Archer final flight, Sky Queen returns, Crossenkunins, analog anomaly. Liana stood offstage, helmet in hand. Her glider, built by her hands, reinforced by Elias's design notes, waited silently behind her. No onboard computer, no AI stabilizers, no LiDAR, just carbon silk and instinct. "Are you scared?" one of the competitors asked, casually checking the sensor link on his AI suit. She looked at him, calm. Not of flying. Then her name was called. Not as a novelty, not as a footnote. As a finalist, a murmur ran through the audience like wind between trees. A few people clapped. Most didn't. The scoreboard listed her as non-autonomous pilot manual class. What's she doing here? Is this a retro thing? No telemetry. Can't even track her dive. Elias watched from the tree line, half-hidden, arms crossed. He didn't move, didn't blink, but his foot pressed gently into the dirt as if grounding her nerves from a distance. The other pilots performed flawlessly. One glider banked across the canyon in a perfect corkscrew. Another deployed an automated hover to stall against downdraft. They danced with data. Then the final slot lit up. Pilot Liana Cruz. Glider manual. Wind AI none. Telemetry NA. Flight style instinctive. Gasps. Even the judges whispered. The launch official looked uncertain. "You sure?" Liana nodded. Now or never. She stepped into the harness. No AI chirped to calibrate. No HUD flickered into her visor. Just the wind brushing her cheek and a red ribbon tied to the glider tip. She ran, lifted, and soared. The audience leaned forward. Every camera zoomed in, but none could predict her trajectory. She moved not in straight lines, but in arcs that bent and flowed with the wind's whim. "She's not climbing by coordinates," one judge murmured. "She's feeling it." Elias, watching, closed his eyes. Listened to the wind howl up the western ridge. Just as predicted by his notes, at 6:23 p.m., the east wind breathed, and Liana felt it too. A sharp pull in her ribs, a tension in the ribbon. A bird shifted 3 trees to her left. She dove. The crowd screamed. One student yelled, she's falling. But no, she wasn't falling. She was diving into the shift, letting it catch her, and it did. Her glider snapped into a tight spiral, rolled across a downdraft edge, and lifted up higher than any pilot before her that day. The entire stadium froze. Then someone stood, a judge. Then another. One whispered, "Impossible." The scoreboard couldn't register her altitude. No telemetry. Just a red ribbon streaking across the sky like a comet from another time. In the crowd, people began to film. Not to mock, but in awe. "She's not flying despite the wind," someone said. "She's flying with it." The live stream chat exploded. "I've never seen flight like this. Forget AI, this is poetry. She's making the wind sing." Then, mid-flight, she passed through the narrow ridge channel, the exact one Elias had shown her weeks ago. The cross-current there was brutal, uncharted, and known for flipping gliders sideways. But Liana twisted the controls, leaned with her left shoulder, and whispered, "Now." The glider shifted, sliced through the crosswind, and straightened into a flawless glide. And the crowd lost it, screaming, applauding. One person collapsed into tears. Even the launch official dropped his headset and said, "That's not flying. That's a goddamn miracle." The flight ended with a gentle, perfect landing on the south-facing slope. No stumble, no correction, just grace. Silence fell for a beat. Then the mountain exploded with sound. Cheers, shouts, applause like thunder. One judge ran down the stairs and hugged her. Elias didn't move, still watching, still silent, until one of the students spotted him. "Hey, that's the old guy, the one from the crash." Cameras turned, and Elias stepped forward, slowly. The crowd parted like waves. He reached Liana, looked her in the eyes, said nothing. Then gently, without ceremony, placed his hand on her shoulder. The wind blew again, soft, approving. And in that silence, thousands watching didn't need a speech. They understood. She hadn't flown alone. She'd flown for someone. The mountain was quiet the morning after. No drones, no spotlights. Just mist rolling down the spines of the ridge like breath finally exhaled. But the noise hadn't stopped elsewhere. Clips of Liana's flight went viral within hours. Without telemetry data, the footage had no overlays, no statistics, just her glider ribbon trailing like a red flame dancing through wind currents no computer had charted. She flew with her soul. Is this what flying used to be? Someone find that old man. He's a national treasure. Elias Drexler's name once buried rose like a ghost into the digital storm. Within a day, someone unearthed the 1983 crash report. Within 3, a retired military tech leaked Elias's original flight logs. Forums erupted. Hashtags trended. Drexler was right. Wind book. The Wind Whisperer. Then came the letters. From young pilots. From veterans. From engineers who once dismissed analog feedback systems. All saying the same thing. We forgot how to listen. Liana received dozens of interview requests, TED Talks, sponsorships. A global tech firm offered her a position leading their new biomechanical flight intuition division. She said no. Instead, she posted a video. Just her sitting under a tree at the edge of Torin Ridge holding Elias's wind book. "I'm not a pioneer," she said softly. "I just stopped shouting long enough to hear someone else's wisdom." Then she opened the book and began reading aloud. Page 12. Air hums before it screams. Page 41. Pressure change is grief with no language. Page 103. Don't trust calm. It's rarely true. The video hit 1.4 million views in 24 hours. NASA reached out. They weren't asking Liana to fly. They were asking Elias to consult. "We want to build a sensory mesh that can feel like he does," the message read. "We believe there's something missing in our systems. A heartbeat." She showed him the letter in person. Elias read it quietly, then folded it, tucked it into his coat, and said nothing. He didn't need the validation, But he did appreciate the irony. Later that night, she found a new entry at the back of the wind book, in fresh ink. His handwriting unmistakable. When they finally hear you say less. They didn't start a school. That would have made too much noise. Instead, Elias and Liana started with a rock. Just a flat piece of stone placed halfway up the ridge, carved with a simple message: sit, listen, feel. No sign-up sheet, no tuition, no lectures. If people wanted to learn, they had to show up and wait. At first, it was 3 kids, then 7, then 24. Word of mouth spread faster than algorithm. Something about not being plugged in had become magnetic. They called it the Ridge Sessions. Each dawn, Elias stood like a shadow against the rising sun. He never introduced himself. He never told his story. He just watched, walked among them. Sometimes nodded, sometimes didn't. Liana handled the questions well, most of them. What do you mean, feel the shift? How do I know it's a pressure drop and not just wind? Is there a checklist? She always smiled. There's no checklist. There's only attention. They taught with feathers, with leaves tossed into air, with birdsong, cloud lines, sweat, silence, breath. One afternoon, a boy no older than 12 stood at the edge, terrified. He'd climbed the ridge with his older sister, both of them orphaned in a recent quake. He hadn't spoken much in weeks. Elias stepped beside him, handed him a glider with bright orange wings, custom-sized. Said nothing. The boy looked at the open sky, at the abyss below. I can't, he whispered. Elias tapped his own chest. You already did, when you said it out loud. And the boy jumped. Not far, just a small flight. 10 seconds of air. But when he landed, he was laughing, loud, free, unafraid. The next day he came back early, and kept coming. People began documenting the Ridge Sessions in their own way. Not with tech overlays, but journals, poems, sketches. A famous sound designer captured the breath of Torin as an ambient track built entirely from natural wind, and Elias's walking stick tapping stone. Liana turned down another sponsorship, another speaking tour. Instead, she stayed. She kept flying. Not for scores, not for medals, but for others. To show what listening could do. One morning, a military officer in civilian clothes came up the ridge. Asked Elias awkwardly if he'd be willing to teach a few candidates back home how to, not die when sensors fail. Elias chuckled. For once, tell them to take their boots off. Then maybe we'll talk. Winter arrived slowly on Torin Ridge. Frost dusted the stone like powdered sugar, and the wind, once playful and sharp, became heavy, ancient. The Ridge Sessions paused. The young students left behind notes wedged between rocks, feathers tied to branches, waiting for spring. One morning, Liana climbed to the summit alone. Elias wasn't at the ledge. She found him standing at the edge of the old ridge coat, buttoned to the throat, staring east, where the sun broke through clouds in streaks of molten gold. You feel that, he asked without turning. She nodded. There's a low pull, almost backwards. He smiled faintly. It's memory. Air remembers who walked through it. She didn't ask what he meant, just stood with him. Then he turned, reached inside his coat, pulled out the wind book, now worn soft like old leather. He held it for a moment, then placed it in her hands. I won't be here when it blooms again. A chill hit her harder than the wind. But she didn't argue, didn't plead, because she had learned the most important lesson from him. When goodbye is real, silence is enough. He nodded once, turned back to the wind. She walked down the ridge alone. A week later, he was gone. No funeral, no announcement. Just gone. His boots left neatly beside the listening rock, a red ribbon tied around one of them. Spring came. Liana kept flying. At the next Ridge Session, no one spoke of his absence. But every student before starting walked quietly to the listening rock, placed one hand on the stone, and closed their eyes. And the wind carried on. Gentler now. Like it too was remembering. One evening, as the sun bled behind the ridge, A little girl asked Liana, will he ever come back? She looked up at the clouds and smiled. He never left. If this story moved you, there's more where that came from. Follow now to never miss a tale that makes your heart race, break, and soar again. Let the wind carry us to the next story together.